In a galaxy ruled by warlords and predators, one human stood alone, cornered, bleeding, outnumbered. They thought he was finished, until the growl echoed behind them. Backhand index pointing right. If you love humans or space badasses, drop a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. What would you do if your survival depended on a bioengineered apex predator? Now, let's begin. The emergency lights flickered as dust drifted like ash through the ruined corridor of Outpost Helios 9. Oxygen levels were critical. Heat signatures were few. The dead didn't leave trails. Commander Rylan Voss crouched low behind the fractured bulkhead, one gloved hand pressed tight against a deep gash in his side. Blood leaked steadily into the dusty plating below. He had 10 minutes of breathable air left in his suit, maybe less. His rifle was gone, crushed beneath a fallen beam. The only working tech on him now was a proximity alert that hadn't stopped pulsing since the Drakari patrol entered the sector. He exhaled slow, quiet. Noise attracted them. The Drakari weren't subtle. Their armored boots thudded against steel decking, echoing like distant thunder. Their language, low, guttural, heavy with clicks, reverberated through the destroyed corridors. He recognized their tone, hunting mode. And they knew there was at least one survivor. Just not which corner he was bleeding in yet. Rylan checked his sidearm. 2 shots. 1 misfire. Typical. He didn't plan to use it. Instead, he tilted his helmet's cracked visor toward a rusted ventilation shaft overhead. It had been sealed decades ago. But it didn't matter. He wasn't planning to escape through it. He only needed to be visible enough to make them come close, and dumb enough to make them underestimate him. A shadow passed just beyond the corridor. Tall. Reptilian. Glowing eyes under a war helm. Drakari. The bigger ones, genetically modified muscle tanks. Not the kind you could sneak past. But not the kind you had to outrun either. Not if you had time. The alien twisted its head, sniffing. Voss didn't move. 3 more shadows flanked it. One chittered in that gravel-scraping dialect and pointed toward Rylan's hideout. Infrared must have caught his cooling trail. Game over. They approached like hunters nearing a crippled animal, blasters raised but relaxed. One of them laughed, a rasping, bitter sound, as he kicked away a piece of metal covering Rylan's legs. Human, one muttered in broken standard. Soft, slow, alone. Rylan didn't respond. His gaze, steady and cold, met theirs through his cracked visor. Drop weapon, said another, though he could see he had none. Formalities then. Rylan lifted one hand, slowly, deliberately, showing it was empty. The other stayed over the wound. You bleed. You crawl. Yet you smile. The largest Drakari narrowed his eyes. Why? Rylan tilted his head, blood slipping down his neck inside the suit. Because you're not listening. That made them hesitate. Just slightly. Enough to give him satisfaction. A high-pitched beep came from one of their comms. Static. Then a voice. No, 2 voices. Screaming then cut off. The Drakari leader barked orders. The others stepped away, raising weapons, eyes scanning. But they were too late to connect the dots. Rylan smirked, just a fraction. You should have paid attention to the background noise. The leader struck him hard across the jaw. Voss collapsed, dazed, tasting copper. The Drakari clicked something on his wrist and snarled, You come with us. Interrogation. No more smiling. They hauled him up by the arms, dragging him limping through the corridor like a prisoner worth almost nothing. Behind them, unseen, a motionless security camera buzzed softly and rotated. Then blinked. Then turned back toward the shadowed hallway where no Drakari dared look twice. Hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. In the belly of a transport frigate, time was elastic, measured in pain, humiliation, and the slow grind of metal as the engines hummed toward some alien warship in orbit. Rylan sat chained in a containment cell just large enough to kneel in. The restraint collar bit into his neck. Cold steel floor. Dim red lights. But he was smiling again. A Drakari sentry stood outside the field barrier, watching him with narrowed, predatory eyes. It was always the same, watch the human break down. Measure how long they last before begging. And this one was wrong. You are unarmed. Wounded. Alone, the guard said with confusion more than pride. Why do you wait like you know something? Rylan didn't answer. The lights flickered. Only briefly. The sentry looked up. Tapped his comm nothing. Static. Must be jump interference, he muttered. But Rylan knew better. It wasn't the ship. It wasn't interference. It was Naira. She was close. 2 years ago, he had stood in a sealed military compound on the edge of Titan's black forests, staring through bulletproof glass at a beast bred for war. 7 feet long, low to the ground, her coat shimmered with adaptive camouflage and heat-blurring cloaks. Her eyes, intelligent and eerie, locked onto his as the neural pairing began. Project Fenrir had warned him. Bond once, bond for life. No resets. No second chances. If she rejected him, he'd be recycled with the other candidates. But she hadn't. She had walked to the glass, placed one paw against it. And Rylan had placed his hand on the other side. Since that day, Naira hadn't let him vanish without her. Not in war. Not in orbit. Not in hell. So when Outpost Helios 9 fell under Drakari assault and the orbital defenses were torn to shreds, Rylan had made one move. He'd fired a silent signal into the black, a biometric pulse key to her genome. And now he knew she was hunting. Not the loud kind. Not the dramatic entry. No explosions, no roars. That wasn't Naira's way. She moved like a phantom, one who studied you for minutes before making her kill seem like an accident. The lights flickered again. The sentry turned. What? There was a sound. Barely audible. A faint click, like claws on steel. Rylan leaned forward. The Drakari raised his rifle, eyes wide, scanning the hallway. Nothing. Then a low growl. So deep it rumbled through the floor. The sentry turned too late. A blur dropped from the ceiling, silent and surgical. There was a flash of claws, a gurgled shriek, and then, silence. The field barrier blinked off. Rylan stood slowly, his chains falling away with a soft hiss. The collar around his neck released. And there she was. Naira. Covered in faint blood spray. Her camo shimmered, then faded. She stared at him with sharp golden eyes, tail low, muscles coiled like wire. Hey girl, he said softly, reaching one shaking hand toward her. She licked his wrist. Just once. Then turned her head. More were coming. Alarms blared 2 corridors over. Drakari shouts rose. Something exploded in the distance. Probably another guard post. Rylan grabbed the dead sentry's comm unit and snapped it open, rewiring the frequency in 3 flicks of his wrist. Access core schematics. Security layout, he whispered. Naira moved to the doorway, crouched and still. He looked at her and smiled again, this time not from pain or defiance but reunion. They thought I was defenseless, he said. Behind him, the ship's klaxon screamed louder. And now, he whispered, they're trapped with you. The hallway ahead flickered once more. Naira disappeared into the dark. And Rylan followed. Rylan's boots echoed lightly through the service corridor as he stalked just behind Naira, her massive form gliding through the shadows with unnatural silence. Her body remained low to the floor, ears twitching at every vibration in the hall. Though her appearance was feline, her movements betrayed her enhancements. There was too much precision, too much calculation in each step. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. He raised 2 fingers and pointed toward the next intersection. Naira paused, her camo rippling as her body vanished against the corridor's metal walls. In another breath she was gone. Rylan moved on, lighter now with a rifle in hand, Drakari make, unfamiliar in shape but intuitive enough for a trained mind. He hadn't fired it yet. He didn't need to. Naira had cleared the way with merciless efficiency. Not one alarm had sounded before they were halfway through Deck 7. A panel blinked overhead. The Drakari must have found the bodies. Finally. He tapped into the scavenged comm again. Static, garbled voices, some in standard, most in native dialects. Someone screamed. Another channel was cut. Triage protocol had begun, which meant they'd finally understood this wasn't sabotage. It was something worse. The next corridor opened into a wide observation atrium. A massive window stretched across one wall, showcasing the silent stars. A perfect place for an ambush, and Rylan knew it. He stayed low, shoulder pressed to the wall. Naira joined him, still cloaked, her eyes the only thing visible, those twin gold flames in the dark. His hand moved in a single gesture, flank left. She obeyed without hesitation. He took the right. As they approached the central pathway, a sudden tremor ran through the floor, movement from above. They froze. Then another impact, heavier this time. Boots. Reinforcements. Through the upper catwalk came a full squad of Drakari in crimson-plated armor, weapons raised, thermal visors scanning. Rylan ducked behind a collapsed bench as one of them shouted, "Target identified. Human operative is armed and moving toward engineering." Orders. No answer. Just static. Their leader snarled. "Weapons live. Secure the corridor." 10 seconds passed. Then Naira pounced. From the shadows above the window frame, she dropped with a fluid arc and landed squarely on the rear soldier. Claws pierced armor. Blood sprayed. A blaster discharged wildly, striking nothing. Chaos erupted. Rylan sprang from cover, firing twice into the fray. One Drakari fell, shrieking, his weapon flung sideways. Another tried to flank Naira, but she twisted mid-strike, her claws raking across his face before she disappeared again, camouflage shimmering as she leapt back into the gloom. The survivors fell back, shouting into dead calms. They didn't last long. When silence returned, the air smelled of scorched ozone and copper. Rylan exhaled, his chest tight. He knelt by one of the bodies, yanked a data card from a utility belt, and slid it into his suit's interface slot. The screen flickered to life with a low hum. Deck schematics. Power grids. Prisoner logs. He narrowed his eyes. A section had been flagged, command level, Deck 1. A holding chamber, marked as interrogation suite, organic threat, human origin. They had known about him. Anticipated him. Which meant he wasn't a surprise. Naira growled low, pacing near the window. They wanted me alive, he murmured. Not for intel. For study. He clenched his jaw and stood, knowing where they were going next. Commander Zarak stood before the tactical display, claws drumming against the surface of the holodeck. His crimson eyes narrowed as another camera feed blinked out. Deck 7, Section 4, lost. Beside him, a younger lieutenant swallowed hard. They are coordinated, Commander. The creature is not acting alone. Zarak turned slowly. His voice was soft, dangerous. Do you think this is new to me? The lieutenant tensed. We've studied human warfare for over a decade. Brutal. Illogical. Reckless, Zarak continued. But even I underestimated their capacity for symbiosis. He tapped the feed again. A brief flicker showed the pair, one man, one beast, moving down a hall at speed. Organic combat pairings, Zarak muttered. Savage. Yet efficient. He watched the human's face in the feed, expression focused, almost calm. This isn't just some pet. It's a bonded combatant. He turned toward the chamber doors. Prepare the neural scanner. I want to know everything about that thing's mind. But sir, we haven't captured it. Zarak bared his fangs. Then we will lure it. Rylan reached Deck 2 without resistance. That alone made him suspicious. Naira stayed pressed to the shadows, her movement reduced to a slow prowl. Even she seemed wary now. Too quiet. Too open. The hallway ahead bent slightly, then ended in a tall door guarded by no one. He stepped forward cautiously. Trap, he muttered. He wasn't wrong. The moment he stepped through the threshold, the door hissed shut behind him and heavy kinetic locks engaged. A hum filled the room. Invisible but dense. A suppression field. His muscles tightened and the rifle slipped from his hands, clattering to the floor. His suit sensors blinked red. He was inside a low-gravity stasis field, energy tuned just below lethal. Movement became sluggish. Thought slower. A voice echoed from the shadows. I wanted to see the animal man up close. Rylan raised his head slowly. Commander Zarak stepped from the darkness, armored in ceremonial combat plating, face bared. You know, Zarak said, circling, my people respect cunning. Not strength. Not numbers. But intelligence. And what you've done here tonight, that's earned you a measure of my interest. Rylan didn't reply. Zarak gestured, and the holopad behind him displayed images. Earth cities. Military structures. Biotech labs. And then, Naira in a research compound surrounded by scientists in Terran uniforms. We intercepted this transmission months ago, Zarak said. A covert facility on your moon. Project Fenrir. One of many. Rylan's lip curled slightly. So you knew. We hoped, Zarak corrected. But we needed proof. And now we have it. He circled again, stopping in front of Rylan. I'm not interested in your war. I'm interested in what makes you so dangerous. She's not a what? Rylan said quietly. Zarak tilted his head. You speak of the beast as if it's a peer. She's not a beast. The commander grinned. Oh, but she is. And you're the key to unlocking her. Because without you she's unstable. Wild. But bonded? She becomes lethal discipline. He stepped closer, claws brushing Rylan's neck. You gave her purpose. And now I'll take that purpose for myself. Rylan's eyes sharpened. She's already here. Zarak paused. There it was again. That human confidence. The smile when they should be screaming. The calm before the bloodbath. Then it came. A distant alarm. No explosion. Just a sound, an animalistic scream, reverberating through the steel. Zarak stepped back quickly, activating the force field around himself. "You'll die before she gets to you," he snarled. But Rylan wasn't looking at him anymore. His eyes were focused on the control panel behind the commander. He had been counting the hums, tracking the frequencies. And now he smiled, not as a tactic but as victory. Naira wasn't just coming. She was already inside. The lights exploded. Glass shattered. The ceiling tore open with a scream of rending metal. Rylan dropped to his knees, the suppression field flickering. A blur of shadows and gold eyes fell through the smoke. Zarak turned too late. She didn't roar. She whispered death. In seconds the field was down. Rylan surged forward, grabbing the fallen rifle. Naira moved like liquid vengeance, claws tearing through Zarak's shield before it could fully engage. Blaster fire ricocheted. Zarak fought back, slashing wildly, hissing commands into his suit's interface. None responded. Rylan ducked beneath a sweeping strike, pivoted, and fired point-blank into Zarak's exposed side. Armor cracked. Blood sprayed. Naira struck again. This time he didn't rise. Rylan stood over the fallen commander, breathing hard. Sparks rained from the shattered ceiling. The interrogation suite flickered with backup lights. He turned to Naira, who stood still, chest heaving, watching the door. He stepped beside her, hand resting on her shoulder. More footsteps approached, heavy, deliberate. Naira growled, low and ready. But no soldiers came. Just silence. They were running. Every Drakari on that ship had heard what just happened. Rylan stared at the broken display still cycling through images of Earth. He reached forward and keyed in one command, an open broadcast. Then he spoke, voice steady, low, undeniable. "You wanted to know what makes us dangerous. It's not just the weapons. Or the beast. It's what happens when you try to take what we love." He paused, then looked to Naira. "We don't run. We don't break. We retaliate." He shut the display off and turned toward the exit. The corridor ahead was clear. But the war had only begun. The corridor stank of ozone, blood, and burning circuits. The ship groaned beneath their boots, still alive but wounded. Emergency lights cast the walls in dull red pulses, and alarms sang like dying birds from distant decks. Yet the silence around them was undeniable. The Drakari were no longer hunting. They were hiding. Rylan moved without hesitation, weapon lowered, eyes sharp. Naira stalked beside him, alert, her tail flicking with residual tension. She hadn't relaxed since the fight in the interrogation suite. Not entirely. She knew something he did. This wasn't the end. It was the opening salvo. They reached a lift shaft. Rylan slammed a fist into the emergency override. It groaned, sputtered, then dropped them through 4 decks on manual override, magnetic anchors guiding them down the spine of the cruiser. The air thickened as they descended. The heat from engineering below was palpable. He tapped into the stolen datapad. The schematics loaded slowly, corrupted but functional. "Central cores on deck 12, he murmured. "Power junctions are exposed. We can cripple the entire ship, but we need to do it fast." Naira made a low chuffing sound, her eyes glancing upward. A warning. The lift slammed to a halt. Rylan raised the rifle instinctively. Nothing moved. He stepped out slowly, sweeping the hallway. Flickering light panels, torn wires, signs of battle, old battle. This part of the ship hadn't seen maintenance in cycles. They advanced cautiously. Then came a whisper over the speaker grid. A language not standard, not Drakari. Something older. Deeper. Rylan froze. Naira growled, but even she looked uneasy. The voice stopped. Then static. Rylan looked to her. "You heard that?" She nodded once. They weren't alone, and whatever it was didn't want them to leave. As they rounded the next junction, motion detectors kicked in, and a hidden panel slid open. A lone figure stood behind a flickering energy field. A prisoner. Tall, emaciated, with skin like burnished metal and eyes that glowed with a dull green hue. Rylan didn't lower his weapon. The figure didn't flinch. Instead, it raised one hand slowly, palm outward, a gesture of peace. "I know what you are," it said in perfect standard. Its voice was cracked but fluid, like oil over stone. "And what follows you?" Rylan stepped closer, cautious. "How? I was once like you. Human. Before the Drakari found me." He stared in disbelief. "You're lying." "No," the figure said softly. "They called me Subject 9. Project Odin. I was a soldier. A prototype." Naira's ears flattened. Rylan narrowed his eyes. "That project was decommissioned. Everyone said it failed." "It didn't fail," Subject 9 said. "It evolved." Rylan looked at the console beside the cell. Security was minimal here, no guards, no monitors. Whatever the Drakari had done, they hadn't expected anyone to visit this place again. What do they want from you? They want to know how to make more of me. Just as they want to know how to make more of her, he said, nodding toward Naira. They think the future of war is synthetic. But they're wrong. It's bonded. Rylan studied the man. There was intelligence there, pain too. But also control. Precision. You can help me, Rylan said carefully. If you know how this ship runs, how the systems link. I do, Subject 9 interrupted. But you must understand, once I leave this cage, I won't be what you remember as human. I don't care what you are, Rylan said. I care what side you're on. Subject 9 smiled faintly. Then I am yours. The energy field hissed as Rylan disengaged it. The figure stepped out slowly, his joints crackling like rusted hinges. His movements were precise but off, too symmetrical. What's your name? Rylan asked. I had one, he replied. But that was before they rebuilt me. Now, just call me Odin. Naira sniffed him once, low and cautious, then accepted him with a flick of her ear. Together they moved on. Down into the heat of the ship's heart. Engineering was chaos incarnate. Tubes hissed, lights blinked, reactors throbbed with unbearable pressure. A skeleton crew of Drakari engineers scrambled when they entered, but they were too slow. Rylan fired twice, non-lethal shots, knocking them unconscious. Odin stepped forward to the main control dais. His fingers interfaced with the Drakari panels seamlessly. Runes lit up in response. I can reroute the main coolant systems, Odin said, voice flat. Cause a cascading overload in 5 minutes. We'll have that long to escape before the core breaches. Too dangerous, Rylan said. We're still deep inside. There's another way, Odin replied. I can lock down the ship's command uplink and turn it into a beacon. A beacon? For Earth. Rylan hesitated. Rescue. Retribution. He looked at the panel, then to Naira. She stared back at him with calm, unflinching resolve. We do this, Rylan said. There's no going back. There never was, Odin answered. He pressed a final command. Alarms exploded. The ship's heartbeat changed, faster now. Panicked. Rylan sprinted back toward the lift, Naira and Odin close behind. Red lights pulsed with intensity as systems began to crash. Gravity wavered. The air shimmered with unstable heat. In the distance, hull plates groaned. Emergency venting triggered. They burst into the lift chamber only to find it disabled. Emergency lockout had engaged across the decks. Manual shafts, Odin growled. There's one behind the access bay, follow me. He pried open a sealed maintenance hatch with enhanced strength. They dove into the shaft, climbing rung after rung as the temperature surged around them. Somewhere above, a bulkhead collapsed. Rylan didn't stop. Neither did Naira. By the time they reached Deck 4, oxygen masks were required. Systems were failing ship-wide. Odin paused at a terminal, his hand interfacing once more. Another 2 minutes, he said. The beacon is live. But I've encrypted the signature. Only a Terran vessel will recognize it. Rylan turned to the viewport at the end of the hall. Through the scorched glass he could see stars, clear and cold. And then, movement. Something massive, descending out of the void like a predator from deep space. A Terran strike cruiser. Rylan laughed, breathless. They got the message. Odin nodded. I told you. Retribution. Naira growled again, pacing now, her ears tuned to distant motion. Drakari were regrouping on the upper decks. Their moment of panic was over. Now came the counterattack. Get to the hangar, Odin said. There's a dropship we can use. What about you? Rylan asked. I'm not leaving. I'll make sure this beacon keeps transmitting, until the sky itself burns. He didn't wait for permission. Rylan turned, heart pounding, and took off down the hall with Naira at his side. The hangar was chaos. Dozens of fighters lined the floor, some damaged, some prepped for launch. And in the far corner, a sleek Terran-designed scout craft. Small. Fast. Just enough for two. He sprinted toward it, ducking under live fire as Drakari soldiers emerged from the catwalks above. Blaster bolts sizzled past. Naira roared and launched upward, dragging a guard from the catwalk in a flurry of claws and fury. Rylan punched the scout's access panel. The ramp opened. He leapt inside, disabling the security protocols with Odin's code. Naira reappeared seconds later, bloodied but alive. She climbed aboard just as a fresh barrage struck the hull. Rylan closed the hatch and fired the ignition. The ship screamed as it surged forward. Through the field. Through fire. Out into space. And behind them, the cruiser began to rupture. Explosions rippled along its spine. The Terran warship opened fire, unleashing a salvo of energy that carved through Drakari steel like paper. The beacon screamed its message into the stars. You stole from us. You experimented on us. You hunted us. Now we hunt you. Rylan watched the destruction from the cockpit, breath shaking, hand resting on Naira's head. She was calm now. Focused. Alive. He glanced at the stars ahead. The war had changed. And now it was personal. The strike cruiser loomed in orbit like a divine weapon, silhouetted against the deadlight of the star it circled. Its hangars pulsed with activity, repair drones, Terran personnel, automated weapon batteries, all springing to life as the data burst from Odin's beacon reached Earth Command. The message was received, decrypted, and acted on with grim efficiency. The war had been dormant, silent. But the Drakari had awoken it with fire, and humanity did not forget. Inside the cruiser's command deck, Rylan stood at the central console, armor still scorched from the escape. Naira sat beside him, tail wrapped tight around her legs, licking a clean line down her shoulder, the last remnants of Drakari blood disappearing from her fur. Her eyes tracked every movement around them, not afraid but vigilant. She had seen too many betrayals to ever truly rest. Captain Vance approached, flanked by 2 officers in dark blue tactical gear. Her eyes were sharp and lined with tired years. She studied Rylan for a long moment before speaking. You were supposed to be dead. So were they, he answered without missing a beat. She glanced at Naira. The war leopard met her gaze without blinking. Intel says you wiped out an entire cruiser deck, Vance said, tone even. Rescued a classified Terran asset. Triggered a beacon protocol that's been mothballed for 9 years. Do you want to tell me what you're after? Rylan's expression was carved from stone. I want the core facility. The lab where they bred Naira. Where they took people like me. Where Odin was made. That lab doesn't exist, one officer interjected. It does, Rylan replied, jaw tight. I know where it is. Vance didn't speak for a moment. She simply watched him. Judging not if he believed himself but if she believed him. And if I give you the strike team? You won't have to. I don't want soldiers. I want a ride. Just drop us in and then forget the rest. Naira stood, stretching her long muscular frame. Her presence was magnetic, terrifying, beautiful. No one said anything. Vance nodded once. You've got one shot. They came out of lightspeed over a barren moon tucked into the gravity well of a red dwarf. It was a blank place. No atmosphere. No history. But buried beneath its surface was something old. Something awful. The Drakari had learned to hide their sins in plain sight. The lab, according to Odin's decrypted data, was deep, hardened against orbital scans, lined with gravitic dampeners and chameleon plating. But Rylan had seen it once before. Not with his eyes, with pain. With memory. As the drop ship plummeted through the dust-blasted sky, Rylan sat in silence, bracing against the cold. Naira was beside him, fur pressed to his leg. She knew something was different this time. He wasn't fighting to escape anymore. He was going back to finish it. When they hit the ground, dust bloomed in all directions. The landing zone was sterile rock, littered with debris, old sensors, collapsed maintenance pylons, skeletons of a forgotten war. But beneath it all, the lab still lived. Rylan could feel it. A thrum in the stone. A hum in his spine. They moved quickly, following buried tunnel schematics Odin had etched into his mind. The surface hatch was sealed, but Naira made short work of it, slamming her massive paws into the panel until it cracked, then digging her claws through the wiring like threads of silk. The door opened with a hiss of long-trapped air. Darkness. The tunnel sloped downward, lined with pipes and rusted rails. Emergency lights blinked red every 20 paces, and old Terran signage, long overwritten by Drakari glyphs, still lingered on the walls. They descended in silence. Until the whispers began. Rylan slowed. The sound came not from the speakers, nor from a person. It was deeper, subconscious. A psychic residue. This place was haunted not by ghosts, but by memories etched into the metal. They reached the central atrium. It opened wide like a spider's nest, circular, tiered, ringed with glass tanks and metal cradles. Some were shattered. Some still held their cargo, failed creatures, misshapen limbs, snarling muzzles frozen mid-roar. Experiments that never drew breath but were never allowed to die. In the center, a throne. Not of luxury but of command. And in it sat a figure. Tall, slender, armored not in plating but in surgical precision. She rose as they entered, hands folded before her like a priestess at war. "You returned," she said. Ryland's rifle was already up. "Dr. Kalen." She smiled faintly. Her eyes glowed silver in the dark. "You were my best prototype. You and her both." Naira growled low, the sound vibrating through the air. "You turned us into weapons," Ryland said. "You murdered everyone who resisted." "I evolved you," she answered. "The war was ending. We were losing. The Drakari offered survival. But not through peace, through superiority." She stepped closer. "You're living proof it worked. Bonded combat pairs, organic symbiosis. You and the war leopard, perfect. Even Odin was only a step toward what you've become. You're proud of this?" Ryland asked, disgust threading his voice. Kalen nodded. "I am. And I want to finish it. With your help. Think about it, Ryland. The war can't be won by ships or drones. It needs warriors who think together. Kill together. Win together." He lowered the rifle an inch. Just enough for her to hope. Then he said, "You're out of time." A low rumble echoed through the atrium. Explosives, planted on the outer support pylons. Odin had given him the codes. Kalen's face fell. Her control shattered. "You fool. Do you know what you're destroying? This knowledge, this science." "It's not knowledge," Ryland said. "It's a tomb." He fired once. The shot caught her in the chest, dropping her where she stood. No cry. No defiance. Just an end. The room trembled harder. Naira moved to his side. The tanks began to crack. Power surged in desperate bursts through failing circuits. Ryland turned and ran, Naira beside him, the two of them moving as one through the collapsing complex. Fire chased them. So did gravity. The moon itself seemed to scream as the lab tore apart its foundations, trying to swallow its sins. By the time they reached the surface, the blast lit up the horizon. A ring of flame, like sunrise made of vengeance. They climbed aboard the drop ship, battered and bloodied, and rose into the sky as the lab vanished beneath molten stone. Back on the cruiser, Ryland stepped out under the floodlights of the hangar. The crew watched in stunned silence. Not for the destruction he caused, but for the look in his eyes. Resolve. Naira stood beside him, and even among soldiers and war machines, she was the most commanding presence on the deck. Vance met him at the ramp. She didn't speak. He did. "It's done." "No." Her voice was quiet. "It's just beginning." He nodded slowly. "I'll lead the next one," he said. She didn't argue. As he walked toward the command bridge, Naira padded beside him, her head held high. Not as a pet. Not as a weapon. As a partner. Together they stepped into the future. One battle over, the war still raging but no longer lost. And for the first time in years, Ryland felt something spark beneath the armor, beneath the scars.